Hello, I'm Paul Orselli, and I am super happy to be joined today all the way on the West Coast on location outside uh, by my friend Shawn Lani. How are you, Shawn?
I'm fine. Thank you for asking, Paul. How are you?
I'm great. So,
Great.
as is the way of these videos, we launch right into it by saying, Shawn, so what's just one thing about exhibits you would like to share with people today?
Just one thing is a big one thing, but it is one thing. And that is a request to take it outside. What we
Ah,
do in the museum has amazing import out in the real world, where people live and traverse every day as part of their personal experiences moving through the world. If you can introduce experiences and exhibits, whatever you want to call them, and actually be a part of a larger civic dialogue around how cities are created and managed and cared for, and who they're built for, and who gets to build them, and who gets to say. Science museums, I think, have an amazing opportunity that we've been exploring for almost a decade here at the Exploratorium, to start working with community partners, to start working with urban planners, to start working with UPS drivers backing up backwards out in the real world. And the nice thing about working out here is that it allows for improvisation. You take what you get. You look for phenomena that's indigenous. You look at the social landscape, the cultural landscape, the historical landscape. You talk to field researchers and people that are concerned about issues that are of real concern, health and well-being. All of these things are important to people, and it's something that I think science museums can really improve their own practice around. And in the meantime, by the way, expand your audience immensely, expand your impact immensely, and even possibly expand your donor base because you've done all those things.
well, that's awesome, and I'm glad to hear that the UPS drivers chipping in there. But one thing, and I appreciate I appreciate the guts that you have used here by actually being outside, which is awesome. But one thing I wanted to ask you, because I know you've done a lot of work with outdoor exhibits and exhibits in the community. How do you actually arrive at the places to do this work? Like, I mean, for example,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
probably don't just say, okay, here we are, and we're going to set something up in your park or your
yeah.
neighborhood or your waterfront. So talk to me a little bit on behalf of our viewers here. Like, how do you make that transition to outdoor locations?
Well, we have had a long journey learning by making mistakes about how to do that with respect to the people who live and care for areas. And we started in a national park at Fort Mason back in 2008. It was an outdoor grant, National Science Foundation grant. And we were very interested in phenomena, especially around framing understandings of how the world worked, the dynamics of a place. And that was fascinating, but we kind of left people out. The placemaking aspect, the aspect of how to make people feel comfortable and safe and engaged and part of a conversation and a larger dialogue. All those things are fundamental to learning. So what we learned is to go where we're invited, to make sure that we make ourselves available through partnerships and conversations out in the world, in these local communities, especially with bridge partners like urban planning, saying, hey, we're doing a project here, we're working with these folks, this is what we're trying to do, let us make an introduction. Or with the rec and park department, hey, we're redoing this part of the park, we have a public engagement process happening, is there some way we can piggyback on that and add whatever we can add in response to what we hear? So working with communities, and you hear this a lot, and it's really hard to do because you have to give up your expertise and kind of stop being the clever one in the room, which is what we're all so good at, right? Like just invite Paul out here and wait till he comes up with an amazing idea, and then we'll do that. That's kind of where we are, and we're good at that. But I think if you take a breath and step back about why we're doing what we're doing and who we're in service to, the other practice is actually far more rich and ultimately far more rewarding because what you're being inspired by are people who care about things. And in response to those inputs, your outputs become far more targeted and meaningful, and are able to actually impact the way a place feels and even evolves going forward, sometimes for many years. And that's a place of honor, I think, in a person's life and career. And I think that's where science institutions often think of themselves, I think, outside the cultural realm. And science and art are very much a product of culture. And so this behind me, the Exploratorium, is a marvelous cultural institution that has to be aware of what's going on around it. And that, in my mind, means building civic relationships with communities, with community leaders, with the civic agencies who are really kind of ultimately in control of change. Being in dialogue with them, especially around issues of the day, like climate change and all of those impacts that they'll bring, and thinking about, okay, climate change is happening, but who's the first and worst hit? Well, you know who it is, right? It's the people along the shorelines and the perennially underserved, underutilized audiences. You know, sea level rise is going to take up these levels 2 or 3 or 4 inches or 6 inches or some number over the years. But the toxins in the soil will come up far, far before any of us really realize that it's coming up looking for floods. They're already getting flooded with toxins in Hunters Point. So those are the communities we need to start working with, I think, and highlighting these dynamics, so that when we instrument the landscape, it serves a purpose that can then be used to build a sense of civic agency, the ability to advocate for yourself.
So, leaving toxins aside, which of course, I don't even, that's when you think about sea level rise, you think about all kinds of things, but then you think about what's actually happening before that. But I want to talk about turf a little bit, because this notion of turf, like who you are and where you live, like the place where you live, your turf is interesting to me, because many museums aspire to co-creation with communities, or talking about co-creation with communities. But I think that's harder when you are inviting people into your own turf, the museum building, as opposed to something you alluded to before. You are coming in and you are not always the clever person in the room. You are relinquishing authority. So talk to me a little bit about that notion of turf and ownership, and how that plays out in terms of developing exhibitions and installations in neighborhoods and in the outdoors.
Yeah, I love that you asked that, because that's a critical part, I think, of the puzzle, and why we chose early on to focus on public spaces. And public spaces are a generally underutilized resource, especially in some neighborhoods and near some parks. There's always the kind of place that's been abandoned. And generally around these places, you'll start to see some motion from locals, people who care about those spaces, that want to improve it. And it's their space. They want to improve it. They want to work in partnerships. They want funding and assistance. They don't want anybody to take over. And they have that right. They have a right to the city, right? They have a right to their neighborhood park and to their plazas. And so with the positionality, the museum is inversed, where they are the resident experts. We did a project in San Francisco here in a place called Buchanan Mall, where they created a design task force. And that task force was the one that sorted through ideas. We went through sketch sessions. We went through model making, full-scale prototyping. And in that case, we very much responded. We had some design ideas. They responded and modified, and we responded to those modifications over many iterations. This happened very quickly, over 3 months. And so the role that, we're good at building things. A lot of science museums, not all, but a lot, are really good at building stuff, right? And figuring things out.
Some better than others.
Yeah, some better than others. That is true. But even if you're not, even if that's not your capacity, I think the goal here is to find your capacity and see what use it has to others doing this kind of work. And the placemaking movement is as old as the museum, kind of modern day interactives. 1969, Project for Public Spaces, in New York. If you can look it up, they're very much, and this is what's great about PPS, Project for Public Spaces. They are a community-driven organization. They believe in great community design, not great design or by designers. And so they started and held to the idea that the people that live in these places and that are trying to improve them are the ones that ultimately will own them. And they're coming up with this a governorship strategy where the caretaking, the care and feeding of a place then gets passed on to the local folks who are then inhabiting and activating those spaces. I think is critical, and it's actually something that it really leapfrogs. I think leapfrogs traditional museum development practice because they start where we want to be. And so by adopting that practice and adding what we can, then I think we've been able to move much quicker. And this is true of all of our partners, not just Project Public Spaces, but looking at other people like the Trust for Public Land, looking at the Rec and Park system. They have their own pedagogy. They have their own way of engaging kids in parks. Learn from them. But look for that opportunity. You know, we can do that. You know, that's what we do. We find diamonds in the dirt piles, right? And I think exhibit developers and exhibit developments always kind of, I've always thought of it as going through an antique store, you know, like none of it seems to make any sense. And it's for something else. And all of a sudden you find that one thing, you got to have that thing. And then you literally,
hey, I can use that.
Yeah. You literally haul around this 15-pound piece of metal for the next hour while you look around because you don't want anybody else to take it, even though it's been there for 30 years, because those ideas are precious. You know, when you find the applicability of an object that seems abandoned, and it fits the purpose perfectly, you take it. And recognizing those moments, I think, is something that all of us bring in this field.
And I think when you join with communities in that sense of humility, you sort of find these shared capacities, like, okay, yeah, you know, how can we work together? And I know somebody, and we work with this other group, and you know, then everybody's working towards hopefully this same or the similar goal, and you find these things.
That's right. That's exactly right.
You know, since this will end up on YouTube, I always like to point down there, since you mentioned several organizations, so we always like to include references and resources, because people who like to follow up on the conversation, they're like, yeah, what was that organization, or where can I find out more about that? So I'll be tapping you for any books or resources or links that we can include in the description.
Sure, happy to include it. And actually, the yellow exhibition you see behind me,
yes,
that Urban Alchemy guy, and that's Derek, and yellow, that's all middle ground. So that exhibition opened before COVID. It's a social science exhibition that took place in the Civic Center in San Francisco. It is now back, funded by National Science Foundation, to our own plazas, and then back out to the plaza, and then down to Hunter's Point. So I'll include a link there as well.
Awesome.
And that's got a lot of information in there about the work.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time, and I'm sure it gave you an opportunity to enjoy what looks like a nice sunny day there on the pier. So
yeah, I'll be at her all day. That's another benefit of working outside.
That's awesome. Well, again, we'll include links to your work and other references and stuff. That'd be great. But again, Shawn, thanks very much. I appreciate
my pleasure.
The time.
My
Take
pleasure.
care.
Bye.